Hello and welcome to the Terrace Scottish Football Podcast. My name is Craig Telfer, and on this occasion I am the man who makes the num in numbers look sexy. I just realised I've read my introduction wrong there. I had something quite funny written down and I've completely misread it. It's Craig Anderson.
Yeah, well, I got the gist of it more or less. If I can kind of piece the parts together that you were trying to get out there, so we'll go with it. And you've started off on a good foot anyway, because you've put Kyle Vassell as your username on here. So I was saying to you when I came on, got an immediate pop from me. So your faux pas has been ignored. Don't worry about it.
Well, that's good. I see you've put Craig there, which got a pop from me because that's my name as well. So we're off to a good start. Now, Craig, I think it's been a while since you and I recorded a podcast together. Any ideas from the last time it might have been we got together?
It can't have been the last time, but I do remember doing a podcast with you after Kilmarnock got relegated from the Premiership. But that was 3 years ago. So I suspect we've done podcasts since then. But
we must have done. Listen, if you know the last time where Craig Anderson and I got together, please let us know in the Discord, and someone, Ewan, probably can pass it on and let us know. But Craig, we've got a lot to get through because even though we're only talking about 2 games, these are perhaps the biggest games that have taken place in the footballing calendar all season. We're going to be reviewing Celtic's win over Rangers in the Scottish Cup final on Saturday, but I think because we are basically contrary little arseholes, we're going to start the show by discussing the Premiership playoff final second leg between Ross County and Raith Rovers. The Staggies took a slender advantage from the first leg into this contest, but I think it's fair to say they deftly took apart the Rovers here to maintain their place in the top flight. They won 4-0, courtesy of a Simon Murray brace, a Jordan White header and a lovely late strike from Brandon Keller. County win 6-1 in aggregate. They're in the Premiership. Raith Rovers are in the Championship. And Craig, what did you make of this match?
I thought over the 2 games, I thought County could have been out of sight on Thursday night with like how they played up until that kind of last 20 where Raith Rovers finally got themselves in the game. But I actually thought on Sunday's game in the first half, Raith were a big part of the game. I thought they could have got themselves back in touch almost. I even said at half time, I don't think this game is completely over yet. Of course, that was proved wrong about 5 minutes after half time. But even going in like 3-1 on aggregate as it was at half time, I thought, if Raith come out and get a goal, I've watched this Ross County team a few times this season and they're never that far from the self-destruct button.
Yeah.
They got scudded up, was it home to Motherwell not that long ago, and I thought, they have a collapse in them, but Raith didn't do themselves justice. It probably wasn't that surprising given how they finished the season, I would say, because I don't think basically from maybe January onward, Raith Rovers have played all that well, all that consistently. They obviously they had a brilliant run through the first part of the season, which is what got them comfortably in the second. And it's not to say they did fine in the second part of the season. They were more than good enough to make sure they were second. But and their points tally is pretty good for a championship team. Like they finished a wee bit behind United, but United were historically quite good for a champion, regardless of what you saw in the park. So it did feel like maybe they peaked too early, and I think you saw that here because I don't think we saw anything like the best of Raith Rovers. Obviously, stuff like the injury to Keith Watson won't have helped because Dylan Corr, I think, gave his all in the 2 games, but it's probably, for example, not even necessarily a good championship level centre-half to then be playing against two of the best forwards, definitely the best forwards in the bottom 6, but even in Simon Murray, probably one of the best forwards in the Premiership full stop this season. So yeah, they were. It was a comprehensive and ultimately thoroughly deserved win for Ross County, but it was only maybe the game taken away from them in that second half of the second leg.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that when Fowler and I did the podcast reviewing the first leg, I think we were both unanimous that it looked like a massive step up in quality between the 2 teams, particularly in the first 15 minutes or so, where County were just popping the ball around so confidently, and Raith Rovers really couldn't get into the game. But this match here, that gap in quality wasn't as noticeable. And I actually think that the match itself was largely even-ish, but the scoreline perhaps is perhaps a bit unfair to Raith Rovers because it felt as though that about half the chances that County had, they scored from. A couple of half chances, Jordan White at the post, they had a looping long range effort that took this massive bounce just midway through the second half. But other than that, I thought that it was a fairly even contest. And do you see, Rovers only really came into this game and created some chances of their own when the game seemed to be beyond them. I think it was like the aggregate score was about 5-1 at this point. Dylan Easton had a good chance when he came in, curled a shot that Laidlaw did well to tip around the post. But yeah, they were. It felt as though that they were in the game, but when Jordan White scored that goal just before the interval, you think something really special is going to have to happen here to get them back into it. And part of me was thinking, don't get too carried away here, because remember what happened in last season's game when we thought Thistle had put together such an impressive aggregate scoreline, and surely they're not going to chuck it away. So that was part in the back of my mind. But no, I think it was... The overall scoreline wasn't fair in Raith Rovers, but I think that the outcome was very fair. I think Ross County thoroughly deserved to maintain their place in the Scottish Premiership. Who do you think? I think it's a pretty easy question, but it teases up nicely. Who do you think the best player in the park was for this one?
Well, there were two star performers, and it's the two that have been the standout players for Ross County all season, which is Danda and Murray. And
yeah,
I think I've said before, I think Danda can be a wee bit overrated because you see what he lacks defensively. For example, in that Raith Rovers, the only goal they scored over the 180 minutes, but creatively a mile ahead of even his teammates, let alone the championship players it was up against in this tie. But Murray, 2 more goals, like to score that number of goals, I think it was 23 in the season for a not very good Raith, not very good Ross County team, but a patchy Ross County team is incredible, and it's quite strange for a guy at his age to have his best season of his career when he's kind of 32.
Yeah,
there maybe be something of the Brian Graham about him, and that maybe he's just going to be one of these guys that just matures with age. And I actually think Murray, we talked about this with Ewan on the best strikers in the Premiership podcast. Murray's been a wee bit underrated through his time at other clubs. I think he did okay for Hibs, he did okay for Dundee United, not better than that, but it's not like he's been a massive failure anywhere he's been. And then obviously got all the, when he came back to Scotland with Queen's Park, it was a wee slow start, but he's battered in the goals for a couple of years there, and then obviously, or a year and a half there, and then he's done it for a year and a half for County. It's interesting what happens with him. It's not that clear whether he's in contract or not. I think he probably, I don't know whether it was an 18-month or a 2.5 year deal he got, because I've seen some stuff floating about saying that he's on a free, but I don't think that's the case, because if he was on a free, I don't think he'll be at Ross County next season. But
you think someone would have made a contact with him already? This is 23 goals for a patchy Ross County team, as you say. Surely, like for instance, Dundee United, for instance, might want to take it back, make him their sort of marquee signing for the return to the Premiership.
Yeah, and I think so. He stood out the goal in the second half, like the late goals. It was a brilliant finish from him, and we've seen that's been the interesting thing with Murray. We've seen a variety of different goals from him, and he's not just been a goal scorer because he's been a pest. I actually thought he was, especially in the first leg the other night, I thought he was quite quiet. Like, I don't think he wasn't the fulcrum of a lot of what County did in the way he often is, but he scores a lot of different goals. It was a kind of poacher's goal, the first one, and then obviously that. Danda will be away. He'll be, I would say, hard to replace, almost impossible to replace when you get a player of that quality taken away. So it'll be interesting what happens with Ross County, because they've obviously made Don Cowie permanent.
Yeah.
Now,
I was going to. That was something I was going to come on to. We might as well just ask that now. Do you think it's the right decision to give Cowie the job on a permanent basis?
It's hard to know. Like, he obviously he took over. He could not have made it worse when he took over. Like, he'd obviously the sort of burned the bridges, the ashes that he inherited when Derek Adams had kind of left. He was always going to make it better because they were just getting scudded every week, and he did make it better, but they did, as I mentioned, they only took 5 points from their post-split games, which is why they ended up in the playoffs when I think most people didn't expect them to. So he's obviously well regarded there. He's obviously as a player and as a coach and all that.
I think one of the things, Craig, as well, that the previous two managers, Malky Mackay and Derek Adams, they always gave off the impression they were doing Ross County a favour by being there. And I think that Don Cowie's making his first steps in the game, but I think he really has the club's best interest at heart. And I think he's quite an easy player for the supporters to get behind.
Absolutely, and I think people kind of turn their nose up when they say this or knows the club stuff. And yes, you don't want to appoint a manager purely on the basis that they used to play for you or that they've got a connection. But there are times when it can help. They understand what makes the club tick a little bit differently, which means that, you know, you don't lose. What I feel Ross County completely lost with Adams, which is strange because he'd obviously did know the club before.
Yeah.
But what they really lost with Adams more than anything was that the type of players they brought in, and fair enough, a couple of them did them a turn in this game. The kind of players they brought in were like just waifs and strays and nobodies. And I think Ross County have always had a bit of a core of these kind of reliable, kind of, call them journeyman Scottish players. And I think the good Ross County teams, you think all the way through, they've had their kind of smatterings of foreign exotic talent, but you've always had your Richie Brittons or your Scott Boyds or these guys. And I think Cowie understands that aspect of it, that I think for any team to be successful in this league, you do need to have reliable players who know the league a little bit. It doesn't mean you have to pack your team with them, but it means you need to build it on that. And so I think he'll do fine. I think Ross County, they obviously are backed financially reasonably well. I think they'll be in the same sort of fight again next season, because I don't think Cowie's shown anything to say he's going to suddenly turn it around, and I think they might be perpetually playing in these matches. You know, it's 2 years in a row, but at the same time, it's going to be a more competitive bottom half. I think the Livingston were obviously goners from a long time ago, and St Johnstone started the season so badly that it gave Ross County a chance, even with that horrible winter they had. That's not going to be the case this season. Dundee United are coming up; they'll be competitive, and I don't know that. I think Hibs and Aberdeen will probably. Well, I mean, they have to get better. It's going to be quite a competitive division. So I think it'll be tough for him, but I don't disagree with the appointment. I think it kind of makes sense, because you know what it's about, and you see what's happening across the. I was going to say across the water, but you know what I mean. A few miles south is to see what happens when a club gets completely detached from its foundations, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. The Inverness Caledonian Thistle moving their training base to Kelty Hearts, and I appreciate that there's other clubs do it. Queen of the South have been doing it for a number of years. They've been training in They've been training in Hamilton. They train in Hamilton. Certainly, I'm sure they've moved around a wee bit. They're training in Hamilton at the moment, and there's other part-time teams that do it. But it just feels a lot more pronounced when it's Inverness Caledonian Thistle that are doing it, and it feels as though that I saw somebody in Pie and Ball write about it. It's people from the Central Belt, Scott Gardner, who are coming up and just don't really understand how the club works, and it just creates this massive detachment and this enormous disengagement between the supporters and the rest of the club. At least Duncan Ferguson can spend more time with his parents, who stay closer to him, and obviously that's the most important thing. But one of the players, Craig, you mentioned about these journeyman SPFL players that County have in the ranks, and a player that Fowler and I were a bit critical of on Thursday had a really good game. That was Jordan White. I thought he played well. You know, a goal, 2 assists, and we were a bit critical of his link-up play and say that he perhaps looked a bit uncoordinated at Starks Park, and maybe Eamon Brophy might have been a better option. But I thought he was excellent here. The little flick to set up Murray for the first goal, very well taken, seemed to really catch Dylan Corr out. I think Ross Matthews might have been completely switched off anyway, so a bit too hard to be critical on him. But his goal really well taken from that corner, scored at a perfect time, and nicely teed up Simon Murray for the third goal. And we've not really talked about the fourth goal as well. It was a lovely finish. You see those finishes where you just like the ball's almost like passed into net, like a nice firm pass into net. Lovely finish from Kayla there, really to put the gloss on the scoreline.
Yeah, and I mean, if you go back to White, he's one of these guys. He has made the absolute most of his career in terms of the talent, or the not much talent that he has. He's actually now had a quite sustained spell in the top flight where most teams would quite happily take him as an option.
I think it might have been 10 years ago. Yeah, 10 years ago he was winning promotion with Stirling Albion from League 2, And there he's there playing the top flight and scoring to keep Ross County in the Premiership. So you've got to say fair play, because there can't be many players that have had that kind of journey in the game.
Yeah, and he obviously had his wee drop out of Scottish football. He was in Ireland for a while, and you kind of thought, because I think he was upwardly mobile at that point, but then it never worked out. It was at Livingston he went to, and it never really happened for him, which is his first foray into full-time football. And then you think, right, maybe this full-time kind of lark's not for him, but fair play, he's kind of worked his way back up through various different clubs. I know he spelt Motherwell didn't go that well. Maybe that's just that size of clubs, maybe just one step too far for him. But at Ross County, he's definitely found a home up there. And yeah, you know what you're getting with Jordan White, although what you were saying was fair, that you think you know what you're getting, and they didn't really get it the other night, but you usually know what you're getting with him. And you couldn't really pick faults, because I think normally with County, it's a defence you can pick fault with most of the time, but they all actually played quite well in this game. There were openings, but it wasn't like the calamities that we've seen from them. And it'll be interesting to see with that, like, where they go next season. Do they keep some of these guys? You mentioned Kayla scoring that goal. He's one of the kind of guys who kind of appeared with Adams, and I don't know how many of these players, like Eli King was another one. They've come in, they've not been awful. They've just not really made any impression. Kayla at least has now got something to be remembered by, but it'll be interesting to see with Cowie whether he takes them in a new direction. I think he will. I think it'll be back more to the tried and tested. I think they might be looking across to Inverness to see whether they can kind of tear at the carcass of that particular relegation, because that's been a pretty productive route for County in the past as well.
I suppose Callie's best player this season, their most coveted player, would be Cameron Harper, who I think might actually be linked with Kilmarnock. Am I right in saying that? Yeah,
I think so. I think talking of Ross County being big on kind of ripping up Inverness, that's been a Derek McInnes kind of his time at Aberdeen. He took half the Johnny Hayes, Adam Rooney, Graham Shinney, Marley Watkins. With one other, Greg Tansey didn't work out so well for him, and then he obviously took Robbie Dees last summer. So it's definitely been something that he's been known for. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if Harper did come to Kelly, but I suspect there will be some of those kind of guys who maybe have been reasonable and thinking there might be some interest from County as well. Even your kind of, I don't mean Wallace Duffy, but even you're kind of that type of guy who's like been an okay championship player for Inverness. I think sometimes it's just he's cheap, he'll come in, he knows the area, you don't have much upheaval, and so it's I think that will be a direction for them. But I think Ross County will want to write off this season. It's been a pretty tragic season for them, to be honest. Last season was bad, but it was bad in a kind of like actually last season is the more traditional how you get relegated out of the Premiership in the playoff season, where you're just not very good for the whole season.
This felt like almost like there's something quite existential about this season, and I think it's we mentioned Malky Mackay perhaps should have gone in the summer there after keeping them up. Thanks very much for your hard work. We're going to move on to someone else. And Derek Adams coming in, although he started promisingly enough, just turned into a complete car crash. And I've never seen someone so almost desperate to get himself sacked from the job. And crazy, you're absolutely correct. Write this one off. We've stayed up fantastic. Don Cowie's come in. We're perhaps a little bit behind in terms of our preparation because we had to go through this playoff contest. But see, like after Sunday, hit the reset button, and then we'll look to kick on in the summer, so this kind of thing doesn't happen again. But we've spoken a lot of time talking about Ross County, but I suppose we really have to talk about Raith Rovers. And yes, they'll be disappointed here, and yes, they were outclassed. But it's been a really, really good season for Raith Rovers. If you think where they were 12 months ago, where they finished in 7th place, and if you remember the final game of the championship season where 9 of the 10 teams had something to play for other than Raith Rovers, who were just marooned in this no man's land in the lower mid-table. But they've come in, a little bit of money's been invested in the team. They've been able to put good players out on the pitch. There seems to be a good infrastructure there. And if you're going to use Sean McGuigan's opinion as a barometer, there's a real good sentiment between the players out in the park, the fans in the stands, some incredible moments over the course of the season. And to really be challenging for the championship, for probably up until the final 3 matches, and they'd be 1 game away from promotion to the Premiership. That has to be a very, very good season by most standards.
I think it is sometimes a difficulty because I think Partick Thistle felt it last season as well, of the way the playoffs work, that you can have a really good season, you should be finishing on a high, but then because the way, it finishes with you losing the playoff game, it's like you're kind of on a bit of a downer when you probably shouldn't be, because it's like it has been a fantastic season for Raith Rovers. We already talked about how the fact that it didn't maybe finish as well as it could have even in the regular season, and then taking a tanking in the playoffs is never pleasant, but they did, this is the 3rd time they've been in these Premiership playoffs, and they've gone 1 step further every time, because I think the first time they played in it, they lost to Hibs in the quarter-final, then this time they lost in the semi-final to, who was that? Dundee, the year Dundee beat Kelly, and then this time they've got to the final. So they're going 1 step further, but yeah, they feel like when you look at the Championship and you look at which of these clubs look like the next club who might be in the Premiership, it feels like they're the ones kind of knocking on the door the most with it. I've never seen, I remember Raith Rovers in the Premier Division, just when I was getting into football, but I've not really ever seen them play in it. And so it would be nice. I think they've got a chance. I think it can be difficult to replicate the circumstances around this season, but maybe that's the good thing as well, because you don't actually want to be trying to win every single one of your games with a 93rd minute goal. But I think the Championship is a very interesting division this season, because
can't wait for it.
You've lost Dundee United, who are are a club that are a bit big for the Championship. They're going to always be the big fish in the Championship. You've brought in Livingston, who are not. You've also lost Arbroath, who are the kind of part-time team kind of punching above their weight at that level. You've lost Inverness, Hamilton, pretty much interchangeable in this respect anyway. And then you've brought in Falkirk, who should always be at least a Championship club. So it really feels like every single team who'll be in that division will think they can finish in the top 4.
I think so. I think you're right. The only outliers there, in terms of the clubs, are all broadly similar status, and the only outliers there are Queen's Park, but they are also propped up by a multi-millionaire who's allowing them to compete at perhaps this unnatural level. But I think you're absolutely correct. I think at the beginning of the season, every single team will be looking, we should get into the top 4 here. There'll be differences in budgets, and perhaps teams like Morton, for instance, might struggle. I know that he just signed a new contract there today, but Rhys McCabe might be tempted away somewhere else. He showed a lot of promise in his career. But really, really interesting to see it. And if Rovers they've obviously, with guys like Andy Barrowman and John Potter there, and Dean McKenzie, the team that they took on mass from Kelty Hearts, they've got the people in the background that are really looking to grow the club. And I'm really interested to see what business they do going forward, who they turn over, who they keep and who goes. I think it's really important that they keep a hold of guys like, Sam Stanton, for instance. I think he had a really good season. Scott Brown had a really good season. I think he was one of the best midfielders in the division. If you've got 2 players like that at the fulcrum of the team, they're quite easy to build around. I think that guys like Dylan Easton might move on elsewhere. I think that the stat that came up on the screen, that was his first start of the season since early April. So I think that he might be looking to get more game time. There was talk, bizarrely, he might be going to Motherwell or someone like that. I'm not sure that he might be good enough for the top flight. There are times when you see him play, and I've been guilty of this as well, when you see him play and he's good, and you get really carried away. But then, particularly over the more difficult periods of the season, you see, yes, this is perhaps why he's never really been given a go in the top flight before.
Yeah, I think it's interesting one, Easton. Sometimes a Premiership club can take a play like that, because it's like they're only needing the good bits of them. They're not going to be relying the way Raith Rovers maybe did for a spell on Dylan Easton being your creative force all the time. It's like, here is a guy you can bring on for 15 minutes and maybe he's going to open a lock or something, which I mean, the Motherwell will be losing Blair Spittle, who's maybe had a not quite the same career trajectory, but obviously Spittle was a really highly regarded youngster in the way that Easton was. Then ended up rattling about the Championship. He didn't go quite as low as what Easton had for a while. I don't think Easton's as good a player, but you could kind of see the logic in it. But I think from Raith's point of view, they need to sort out the defence. Like, if you had Murray and Watson playing all season, that's fine. That's a pretty solid. But they don't seem to have had that, and they've either had to sacrifice Brown into there and lose him from midfield, or they've had to kind of lean on someone like Core. I do wonder if, in hindsight, and I think they were outbid for him, but like losing Dan O'Reilly to Thistle probably didn't help, because he was at least another centre half you could rely on to an extent. I think, look, you're more of an expert than me, but think looking at the Championship, I see it from 3, which is Raith, Rovers, Falkirk and Thistle next season. I think will be the top 3, but
Falkirk need to do a bit more business. I was thinking about Falkirk actually, because straight away I was thinking, yep, Falkirk definitely, they're the team that's going to win the division. But I was thinking players that they've signed, they've brought Michael McKenna, who might have had an absolutely phenomenal season when Arbroath were challenging Kilmarnock for the Championship, but that was 2 years ago. What has he really done since then? I know John McGlynn and him are quite friendly, goes back to their time together at Livingston, but he's not necessarily the kind of player that's going to strike fear into the hearts of many defences. Gary Oliver's been given a new deal as well. Decent enough player in League One. I'm not sure he's quite the superstar for the step up. And then there's as Sean McGuigan made the point, Tom Lang is their superstar centre back, and he was fairly mediocre as Raith Rovers finished 7th place the previous season. And on top of that, a lot of the guys who have done so well for them, guys like Ross McKeever, Callum Morrison, Aidan Nisbet, they've all played in the second tier in the past, but not to any great degree of acclaim. So I think it is a bit to ask them. Maybe I was getting a bit too carried away with how the previous season had gone, but if McGlynn can get his additions correct and a couple of other players come in, they can do well, because ultimately those are some good players within that team.
I think there's just a bit to be said for the momentum, and I think the fact that
definitely.
It is McGlynn, and I mean, maybe I made this mistake with Derek McInnes last season, where you're like, the manager's so good that it doesn't matter what the players are like. He'll just get just get them up the table, and obviously never happened for Kelly last season, and maybe it'll be the same. But I think the jump from League One to the Championship isn't as big as going from the Championship to the Premiership, and I think Falkirk will be up there because they've got a good manager, because they will have a big support, they will have the resources, and ultimately they're going to have more resources than Hamilton, than Livingston, than Ayr United, than Morton.
Yeah.
So, but just automatically, you would expect them to be up there, because you see that Thistle are the ones that Doolan seems to be. I think Doolan seems to be a pretty good manager, and he's getting a lot out of them. Brian Graham might be the question of can he go back and do it again? Because
no evidence suggests that he's slowing down. He's only getting better with age.
They just seem like they're on that kind of trajectory. You'd be really surprised if they don't finish in the playoffs. We'll put it that way. And Raith are a team that I think could finish. If I say Thistle, I think they will finish between 1st and 4th next season. Raith, I think, could be like 1st to 8th, because I think there is a chance the arse could fall out of it just the same, in a way that I don't think could happen with Thistle, where there's a wee bit more sustained evidence now that they are just a solid team at that level. So it's going to be. I mean, it's always a good division, but I think there's not an obvious standout at the start of the season. We've not mentioned Dunfermline, like McPake's got promoted before, but I don't really trust him as a manager at that level.
Injuries, they had a lot of injuries last season.
You have no idea what's happening with Livingston. Like, you don't know whether they are going, because they've actually started, the business they've done is better than I thought they'd be doing. But at the same time, it's like, are they just going to be, they could easily finish bottom, because you don't know what's going on. So it's just such a tough division to call. I think maybe when you're doing your big 26-hour preview pod, like, that will be when you start to have a bit of more of a sense, because you'll have seen the business they're doing, and you might even have had a few of the League Cup games under their belt by that point. You might start to see what they're putting together. But it'll be a fascinating division to call next year.
One final thing, Craig, before we move on to the Scottish Cup final, there was talk from some prominent, or I would say prominent is perhaps not the right word, but people with a reasonably sizable following online, suggesting that we need to take a look at the playoffs, the Premiership playoffs, and perhaps change them. I think it's inherently unfair for the teams that finish in 3rd and 4th. I don't, because I think that if you finish further down the division, it should be therefore harder for you to try and get up compared to the team that finished second. But I'd be interested to get your thoughts on it. What do you think of the format for the Premiership playoffs at the
It's
moment?
obviously a bit hard because you've got 4 playoffs going on in the SPFL in 3 different formats, so it's quite it's quite complex. I think I kind of understand the argument in the sense that you're saying, well, third and fourth are having to do something that third and fourth in League One and the Championship don't have to, League One and League Two don't have to do in their playoffs. But I think when it's Raith Rovers in that final, and you look at the schedule they've both had, like Raith Rovers have been they played 2 high intensity playoff games, and Ross County played 2 high intensity Premiership safety decider type matches, and it's rare that the Premiership team in 11th is actually decided before the last game of the season. So it's not like, I think from the rest point of view, or like the number of games point of view, I don't buy it, but I can understand the thought that why do the 11th place team in the Premiership get more advantages than 11th or 9th place in the leagues below. But it is a scheduling thing, and I think the ideal scenario for me would be to reduce the number of games, if that makes sense, in the playoffs, and not. But I say not have 2-legged affairs, but I think the 2-legged affairs have been brilliant. Like, how many great. But I can understand the argument. But fundamentally, the reason the playoffs are like that, the reason they want to have 6 games in the playoffs is because that is 6 games they sell for TV and 6 games that the SPFL take a big cut of the gates for those 6 games, and 6 high gates, which does then pay for like the playoffs to exist, and the parachute payment that would exist for the teams that go down, etc. So I think I don't think it's going to change, and I don't mind it. I don't get up in arms the way I think some people do about it. And the other thing about it is, it's just, in terms of a neutral one-off game, there were, if you look at the crowds that you got at Starks Park and at the Global Energy Stadium yesterday, you're not going to get that added together at a neutral venue. If you played that game at Easter Road, for example, or McDermott Park, or the Falkirk Stadium, you're going to get the same people going to one game. You're not going to get like twice as many people. So I don't think it makes sense from a crowd point of view. This is not English football, that you are not getting. You don't have the size of towns that when Raith Rovers play Ross County, you can fill Hampden the way Leeds United and Southampton can fill Wembley.
Yeah.
So there's just difference of scale. I think these playoffs have been a brilliant introduction, and I actually think the sort of winner stays on, the ladder format works really nicely, because it really builds that narrative as you're watching them as a disinterested neutral fan rather than someone that's there. Whereas I do think it's sometimes the lower league ones are kind of done before you notice them, because it's like, it's those ties, and a team can be out and you're like, all right, I've kind of, I hadn't quite, because they're all overlapping. So it's hard. Like you've watched, we've both watched our teams in them. I've just mainly watched my team toil through them as the 11th place team. We stayed up once, we went down the other one. You've seen Stenhousemuir win them, I think.
Yeah, we've won. We've been in them 4 times. We've won 3 of the 4. We're relegated through one of them, but it's been broadly quite successful for the club.
And Stenhousemuir finished 4th one of those times, right?
Both times, actually.
Both times, yeah.
Stenhousemuir, the 2 times we were promoted, they finished 4th, and they finished 11th. They won it from 11th place, and they were relegated 9th place. Won it from 9th place to stay up, and they were finished in 9th place and were relegated.
So I guess you're saying that. You've said at the top there, you think 3rd and 4th shouldn't be rewarded, shouldn't be given the same chances as second. Do you think that applies in those ones too? Do you think there should be a different?
No. It's just that I saw people online. I think there's the complaints about how these teams have more rest time, and I'm presuming the only team that's got any rest really is a team that finishes in 2nd place. They're the only team that's afforded any rest, because, for instance, Ross County, as you mentioned there, they still had those big high stakes games in the Premiership to play. I think the format's fine. I think if you change it, you get into issues with scheduling and so on. And I don't think there's an answer. I just think some people were a bit bummed out, perhaps, that Raith Rovers were maybe dismantled a little bit too easily there. It wasn't as much of a spectacle. And so because it wasn't much of a spectacle, the playoffs are to blame rather than the fact that Raith Rovers just ultimately weren't good enough.
The problem, I think, that from the optics of it as well, is that the Premiership teams have generally been winning. And I think I said earlier, it takes a almost downward spiralling Premiership club who are spiralling down into the playoffs for it to go the other way. And I think that in itself is more of the problem. But I think ultimately the reason for that is that the 11th place team in the Premiership is usually better than the Celtic. That's the gulf that exists. I think we shouldn't ever do it, but I actually think if you had a playoff between the bottom of the Premiership and top of the Championship, I'm not sure the Championship team would always win that. And probably they would this season. Yeah. They would this season, but so I think there is just that gulf that when you're taking, usually the second place team in the Championship, as it was this time, are just not necessarily Premiership ready, I think, and that can make it quite difficult for them to win. But playoffs of this rough format exist kind of around most of Europe at this point. Like I saw in France, actually, I think they have, it might be not over 2 legs, but they have at least this season got an almost identical format to what we've got for theirs. I was seeing that the other day. So it's not like we're the only place doing this. I think, to be honest, whatever way you slice it, the playoffs would be good because the stakes are just a lot higher than a normal game. But and I hope they don't go anywhere soon. But I don't think any of them are changing anytime soon.
That's good. I absolutely love them. One of the high points of the season. And you know what's great to see if your team's not involved in them. See, just on a Tuesday night, just for instance, like there's a game just down the road from you. Like for instance, I went to Dumbarton, still in Albion. Just good fun going out and seeing these games and seeing some teams that when you can just switch off and just enjoy the football for what it is, when you don't have anything at stake here, that's a gift in itself. I love the playoffs.
The thing for me, I always find is, sorry, we're cutting across this again, but the thing I find for me is like I'm often quite engrossed in my own team's season during the season, and I do keep myself abreast of other football. I'm doing this podcast. I'm hopefully not sounding like I don't know anything, but usually my team's season is then done at that point, so I'm like I can fully focus on this game, and I'm never like, because the worst of watching football is when you're like having to constantly think of the implications for your own team. Like if you're watching, the worst for it is when you're in the Premiership and you're watching the Old Firm play someone, and I love watching them get beat, but you're also like, I kind of need to see it. Like there's like several times this season with Kelly's European places, I'm like, I want Celtic to beat Aberdeen in the Scottish Cup semi-final. I want Rangers to beat St Mirren in the first game. And it's like, normally I don't want that. And so this removing yourself, detaching yourself from having to kind of think about the implications for your own team is also a big part of it.
No, here. But Craig, listen, we have spent nearly 40 minutes talking about the Premiership playoff final second leg. Let's talk about the Scottish Cup final between Celtic and Rangers. And Celtic came out on top 1-0 in a very narrow contest, with Adam Ida scoring from close range in the 90th minute. Brendan Rodgers said, "Make mine a double." And Rangers are probably kicking themselves that they didn't win this contest, because it was very much there for the taking from them. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, Craig. Celtic 1, Rangers 0. What did you make of it?
It was a terrible game, let's be very honest.
It was a terrible game. I always really enjoy watching Rangers and Celtic games, because even when they're not that good, the atmosphere can make up for it. I don't think that was the case this time. There was very low in quality, very few openings of genuine class, and it was just a bit of a slog. And had the game gone to penalties, I don't think anyone would have been surprised. They're very poor stuff.
I don't think anyone would have wanted it. I was quite relieved when there was a goal, to be honest, because I was like, I was out on Saturday afternoon, so I actually, as I often do with my football, just had to kind of time shift it. I just recorded it and then watched it back when I got home. So right. I was like, I was just like, I don't want to be watching any more of this. And so when that goal went in, it was a bit of a relief, even though the fact there had been so many yellow cards, I was like, this could boil over. That was the only thing that was kind of keeping me interested. I think it was 12 yellow cards in the end, but that was the only thing that was keeping me interested. You and Taylor and I did the preview podcast for the final, and I was
very good pod,
talking about what Rangers needed. And we were talking about what needed to happen for Rangers to have a chance of winning this game. And it was all about creating chaos and creating... In fact, what helped Rangers nearly win the game was like creating tedium. Like it was like, and I don't think it was Rangers necessarily just to play with it, but it felt like I don't think the teams were overawed by the occasion. I think that would be very strange given that but it felt like they were a bit negative. Both teams, they were like not willing to take risk, and it was so strange given I think the league meetings of these teams this season have been amongst the best we've had in a while. In terms of like just them going at each other, and maybe Clement made a kind of conscious decision. He wouldn't have been wrong to do that, to just try and not have that happen, because his team were never going to come out on top in a kind of end-to-end type situation. But I think Celtic were as much here. I think Rangers deserved to win the game. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. I don't think Rangers deserved to win. Rangers were the better team, but they weren't the better team by being good. They were the better team by Celtic being really bad.
Right.
And they can count themselves for that from that point of view. A bit unfortunate not to win the cup, in the sense that they would have only had to have turned up a wee bit more than they did to do it. And the manner of it, you'll remember, mentioned Marley Watkins earlier, you will remember the 15 Scottish Cup final where Inverness, Caledonian Thistle beat Falkirk.
Oh yes,
there were a lot of parallels I felt with the winning goal and the winning goal in that game, because it's a shot from a bit of range at a goalkeeper that if goalkeepers had a very good season and you expect to just hold the ball, and it bounces off him, and then there's a tap in, and we obviously saw that in that. It was very unexpected from Butland. Like, he has had a really good season for Rangers. Their supporters were obviously kind of hoping he might be in the England squad even for the Euros. And it was, I mean, ultimately he did cost them the game there. That was a massive error. Very good. When I was watching the highlights back, it's really good forward play by Ida.
Oh, it's good. Just the way he holds his run. Yeah,
it's that thing that I think they always talk about. As a young forward, you're told always anticipate the mistake, always be in a position in case they spill it. And at that level of football that he plays, he's like an international footballer and playing, Championship in England or playing here. It doesn't actually happen that often because the goalkeepers are usually pretty competent. But when that mistake does get made, he's right there, and it's well taken. It was the first wee moment, or not the first wee moment, but it was a rare moment in the last league game that Celtic won to kind of basically win the league. Their midfield got constantly into those positions that O'Reilly got himself into, where they were just the wrong side of the Rangers midfield. It was either O'Reilly, Hatate, McGregor, all three of them it happened to. This was one of the first times in this game that O'Reilly got himself into that amount of space. I think Rangers maybe overcommitted a bit trying to win the game, and he gets himself into that space in the first place to lash the shot. And it's a decent shot, but as we've said, the goalkeeper should save it. But yeah, so that was a bit of a vindication. I didn't like it. A vindication for Brendan Rodgers in that transfer of Ida, which I think a lot of people were unsure of, but has ultimately been proved right.
Yes, certainly Ewan Taylor of this Parage, who gave a scathing review of him, who had looked at his stats and Wyscout had watched videos back of him and really was not very complimentary of him. But I mean, if you're going to look at it from just bare numbers alone, 10 appearances for Celtic, 7 goals and 2 assists, and ultimately scoring the goal that won them the cup. A successful signing?
Has to be, yeah. And he'll be remembered now as kind of one of those guys that's got a winning goal. I think they said in commentary the last time Celtic beat Rangers in the Scottish Cup final was in the 80s or something like that. So it's not something, they don't actually play each other in the Scottish Cup final all that often.
No, it was 2002 was the last time they met, so I was astonished with that statistic. It feels as though that probably every second final feels as though it's contested between Rangers and Celtic, but that just simply isn't the case.
But yeah, so I think Celtic across the, I would say Celtic played poorly. Their defence was good. They defended well. Both teams defended really well actually in this game. There weren't a lot of defensive errors, but neither team could really get it going from an attacking point of view. Celtic's midfield were really poor in this game. Celtic's attack were non-existent. Dyson Maeda did what he does, and he still kind of managed to terrorise Tavernier at times, but Tavernier had a better game against him than usual, which is just that he was passably okay rather than getting torn to bits. but the kind of mismatches we thought we saw, like James Forrest was okay, and kind of you still saw the flashes that got him back into the Scotland squad, but even the sub, I don't think Ida made much of a difference in how the game played out when he came on. But I mean, he's got that moment. Again, with Rangers, part of the problem is Dessers gets taken off at half time, having not played well, but you're then replacing him with Sima, who is a much better player.
Different kinds of players, though, aren't they?
You're then not really playing with a centre forward. And I think it played into Celtic's hands a wee bit of that. But even with all of that said, Rangers had opportunities to win the game, but for I think a bit of silliness from Raskin and that disallowed goal. I mean, that could be the difference. I don't think Joe Hart's getting that ball regardless. It wasn't the first time. That had clearly been a tactic of those corners, because there were 2 or 3 in the first half that were swung right in on top of Hart as well when they had bodies in around them. The problem with getting bodies in around a goalkeeper now with VAR is it has to be really clean.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do it. There's nothing wrong with there's nothing wrong with blocking off a goalkeeper as long as you're not putting your hands on them. As soon as you're kind of shoving people about, even mildly, it's going to be a foul, because ultimately the goalkeeper is going up to try and catch a ball, and even a wee nudge is going to put him off of his jump, and that's why it's a foul. And I don't think there actually were as many complaints as expected, apart from Clement, who's very much grasping the kind of sore loser mantle already. Like, you're really getting that vibe off him. But I think with Clement in general, it's an interesting one, because I've seen a few Rangers fans kind of now questioning him as a manager, and you can kind of understand why, because he got them into a position where they were maybe back in the title race, and then they chucked it away again themselves. They've chucked away this trophy as well, where they had a definite chance of winning it. The problem is they can't keep burning through managers, Rangers. It's not something they've ever done historically. They've always been a team who've had like a very few number, and it doesn't mean you don't get rid of bad ones when you have to. But I think Clement seems like he's a good manager, but I think I said this on the Terrace Discord, so if you're a Patreon subscriber, this is the sort of insight you can get if you sign up and pay this. But I was saying, although I think he's a good manager, Rangers probably need better than a good manager to be able to bridge the gap to Celtic at the moment. They either need Celtic to implode as they did the COVID season, or they need an exceptional manager who can punch them a wee bit above their weight, and I don't know that he's that.
I would say, though, Craig, one of the things that I found quite interesting was looking at the Celtic starting lineup, and there was not one player that was signed by Brendan Rodgers there, and that's something that Celtic have been quite bad at since he's come in. The past 2 transfer windows, they've made the squad bigger, they've bulked out the squad, but there's not a player that's come in that's made it better. Guys that have shown well in flashes, like Kuhn, Bernardo, looked okay-ish when he came on, didn't really change the tempo of the game, or couldn't really get the better of Sterling and Diamande. But they've just that has to be a problem if you're still relying on someone else's players. That doesn't augur well for the future. And surely with Clement, I think that the guys that he's brought in himself, most of them have looked okay in parts.
Yeah, I think Rangers. Yeah, like Diamande is the one you mentioned, and I think
he had a good game.
He's a player who I watch, and I think we've talked about this in the podcast before. I don't think the actual output from him has matched the kind of visuals of him. I think when you watch him, you're just like, this guy looks like a footballer. A bit like Glenn Kamara, maybe in that respect. You're just like, well, this guy looks really comfortable, knows what he's doing. But it's not like he's had fantastic games or anything like that. But you look at that and you think he knows what he's doing with that. I think Rangers are really unlucky that Cortez, who they signed, looked like he was probably quite a good player, and then obviously very quickly picked up an injury. Definitely their recruitment in January has been much better than the recruitment in the summer, but that was not surprising, because their recruitment in the summer must be one of the worst transfer windows of all time. Probably Butland and latterly Sterling aside. It's very hard to tell with both clubs how much control either manager has over transfers. I think Celtic's recruitment structure is a bit of a mess. Postecoglou seemed to get the trust of them to be able to go and bring in his guys. I don't know how much Rodgers has got what he wanted. I get the feeling Rodgers wanted more money spent and has been given guys on the cheap yet again. And Celtic need to stop signing 4 guys for £2.5 million and just sign 1 guy for 10.
Yeah.
Rangers maybe need a bit more of a mix of that. But yeah, I think there will be huge turnover of the squad at Rangers in the summer because I think Clement is done. I think we talked about this. I think Clement's done with a large chunk of this squad. I don't think he wants anything to do with them. It will be interesting to see if he's in charge of recruitment and how much so he's in charge of recruitment, because that is ultimately what their season next year will kind of live and die on. I just have a fear from the league's point of view that now that Rodgers has kind of got a wee bit of the fire in his belly again, and he seemed very un-Brendan Rodgers-like at the start of the season. I have a feeling Celtic are just going to have a very dominant season next season, and that, I mean, that's not really fun for anyone, but that's my fear, that Rangers could do a reasonable job in the summer and it won't be enough.
Yeah, I think that when you look through the Rangers team, it almost feels like they need depending on what happens with Butland, you might need to replace the spine of the team there with guys. I think there's talk that Goldson might be moving on, Lundstrom's out of contract, he might be moving on, particularly after he could have been sent off actually in this game when he came on. He put in quite a bad tackle. Was it Matt O'Reilly? Right at the very end. He could have been sent off for that. Just a real fuck you way to finish things up.
Two red cards against Celtic.
Two red cards against Celtic. Cantwell, I'm not sure if he has Clement's trust. And up front, Dessers has something about him. You saw the one of the few moments of quality in the first half where Cantwell sort of played a low cross into the penalty box, and O'Reilly's coming back to cover, and he takes a really, really nice touch to get it out from his feet, and ultimately is blocked by Liam Scales. But Dessers has some of it, but also he's got nothing about him as well. He's a real duality of man kind of player. So I think the Rangers could be going into this summer looking to replace the entire spine of the team. And as for Celtic, I think you're right. Just somebody who's going to have a galvanising effect on that squad and just being able to kick it up a level, like a real superstar player, and not just someone who they've signed from Vissel Kobe for €1.5 million, because that's not going to cut it anymore.
Yeah, some of those players work out. Most of that team have been that player. The ones that have been good in that team. You look at Hatate as an example. Like Matt O'Reilly was signed at that kind of level of money as well. But you think back to when Celtic, because it's been, I think it's 20 years now since Celtic won a knockout tie in Europe, like post the group stage. And at that era, they were spending too much money. But at that point, O'Neill was bringing in like your Suttons and your Hartsons and these guys who were like really big money signings and who were kind of statement players as well.
Yeah. They were getting value for money. That's the other thing to say as well. Like broadly, they were getting value for money. These guys, these are iconic Celtic players that you're talking about here.
You're not going to be able to do that from a guy from England now, because the English market's like stupid. But
yeah.
I think they could really do with signing a player that their fans have heard of before he comes. I think that's the bar they want to set. Just whoever that might be, like someone foreign who people are like, oh yeah, him.
Stefan El Shaarawy.
Hey, well, yeah, but you know what I mean. Yeah,
first player that came in our head there.
I always remember when Celtic got through under Neil Lennon to the knockout stages of the Champions League, and Alessandro Del Piero was becoming available, and you think, right, it would be expensive, but why not make a wee statement like that and just be like maybe that player would come and join you at that stage. I think they were playing Juventus, which meant that was never going to happen, but like, and he ended up going and playing in Australia, so it wasn't like he was unattainable as a player. So it's like, just occasionally bring in, and maybe they've done that before with like Freddie Ljungberg, and it was a disaster. So it's getting the right one.
Yeah,
it's getting the right one. It's getting a player who's maybe their quality has dropped off too much to be playing for the really big club that they currently play for, but that they're still good enough to play for you because their mentality is still right to play. And maybe that's really hard to do. I'm sure it is hard to do from a recruitment point of view, but I think playing in this league stage of the Champions League, which they're already qualified for, 8 games against the elite this next season should be enough to attract a player, as long as you're being able to pay them. And I think they need that as that kind of their European record is getting to be embarrassing for them, because they're far bigger a club than what their European results would suggest. And there's no reason that, I mean, they're not quite at the levels of your Benficas and Portos, but they shouldn't be that far off them. And they're miles, they're stratospherically behind these clubs at the moment.
I think it says a lot about how poor a game of football this was, at the fact we're talking about Celtic's transfer targets and their European prospects for next season.
As I say, I watched the game back, and then I was like, before I came on today, I thought I'll sit and watch the highlights, and then I was watching the highlights. I'm like, these things are not highlights.
Yeah. I think I watched I was at the game, we'll come on to that in a second, but I watched the highlights back the same as yourself to remind me. I watched, first of all, on YouTube, and the highlights package was like 3 minutes long. Like, okay. Then I watched the highlights on Sports Scene on the BBC iPlayer, and you're absolutely right in what you said. I mean, that programme was 1 hour long, and they did really, really well to make an hour-long programme out of it, because not a lot happened in this game at all, which really wasn't keeping, and with other games between the teams this season. But I was at the match, I was working at it for the Scottish FA. I was hosting in their business club, which was great fun. The guest was Lyndon Dykes, so I got to meet my favourite Scotland player, which was class, and talk to him. And he's got cornrows in, and we're 2 guys who are on hair journeys at the moment. So that was pretty cool to share some just ideas with someone who else is trying stuff out on the top of their head. But one of the things, well, it's like it was really, really loud and really, really noisy, and there's something really, really impressive about that level, the fervour of that support. I mean, when the match kicked off, I think there were Rangers supporters were firing rockets into the crowd. How on earth they managed to get these into the ground, I don't know, but very, very impressive. The green and orange smoke, the blue smoke, very, very nice, very noisy. That's something I noticed when you come out, how noisy it is. And yes, unfortunately, it comes with a degree of baggage as well. There were some songs from both sides that I didn't like to hear, I wouldn't want to hear again. Some of the conduct from some of the supporters, or guys that were like in their 50s and 60s. There was one guy sitting quite near me who looked like a deputy headmaster. Just the way he was behaving, just found that, that your da sort of thing. You kind of feel quite embarrassed about it, but good to be a part of, and good to watch it. Albeit that nothing interesting at all happened other than Ida's goal, and I don't have a horse in the race, but I was actually, similar as yourself, just thinking, well, that's great, at least I'll get up the road in time after this goes in.
I think I feel you mentioned the singing. I don't think we're not a podcast that goes into that kind of stuff too much, but it was very audible in the watching it on the TV as well, and I think it's regressed a little bit recently. I think I feel there weren't. You would still get these songs, I think, maybe from their away support occasionally, and it would be sung on buses and roundabout, no doubt. But it feels like there's an element in the supporters have been emboldened a little bit again somehow, that I think the clubs need to be looking at that. It's kind of getting to that unsavoury level again, and I don't think it really does the club's favours, because I know plenty of people who support both teams, and I know that most people who go to watch these teams are normal people, but then you kind of watch that and you're like, it's from like a different era almost. And
when you see the support as well, when you I don't want to sound like Blair McNally or anything like that, but when you see the atmosphere, and when it's noisy, and you can feel it in your chest at Hampden, that's really impressive. Like the Rangers fans put a tifo. I'm not a massive fan of tifos, I'll be honest, but that was pretty cool, the RFC. And then Celtic were just waving the flags, and it just looked, there was something quite continental about it, something that you don't really see often in Scotland. That degree of support is really impressive, but unfortunately when it does cross that line into just being quite downright unpalatable, that's the unfortunate element that comes along with it. And part of that is like the degree of what makes it such a fervent derby, but then that's one of the drawbacks that goes alongside it as well.
Yeah, it is, and it's hyped up a little bit. Like the violence or the nonsense around these games is nowhere near as bad as some of the ones you see in the continent. Like
I remember when Boca Juniors played River Plate and the match had to move to another continent.
Yes,
because they couldn't guarantee the safety. Yeah, it's not quite in the same level as that. It's Joe Hart's final game in professional football. Good for him. Turned out to be a decent player for Celtic in the end. This is, I presume that you can't hear me at the moment because I'm having audio issues. Yeah, there we go. That's okay. Sometimes, just to explain that this sometimes happens at my end, there can be audio issues. And I'm going to repeat myself just for Craig's benefit. That was Joe Hart's final game in professional football. What are your thoughts on his contribution to Celtic and association football in general?
He was sadly much less chaotic as a Celtic goalkeeper than I was kind of hoping he might be. I think the Scottish Cup semi-final was maybe what I was expecting from Joe Hart, which was just like non-stop nonsense. Like he's taking a penalty and getting involved in all and all that kind of stuff, and he was just kind of broadly quite competent for most of his time, and it was he was out his depth in Europe, but we kind of knew that about him as a goalkeeper anyway. But that, I mean, most goalkeepers Celtic have will be. And I thought it was quite nice. It was Gary Cocker in the group chat mentioned this, that he actually felt like often when Rangers and Celtic players win trophies, it's like, oh yeah, there's another one. But he actually felt like quite emotional. It felt like he was really enjoying this cup win in a way that isn't always the case. And to be honest, I think he'll probably go down as a very popular figure at Celtic. I think he's been good for them as a goalkeeper. He's obviously won three league titles, I think, and he's probably retired at the right time on a high, rather than stringing it out and maybe running the risk that it goes sour on him.
Yeah, I think you're right. Sorry to cut across you. I think they mentioned this on Sports Scene that him coming in has been quite good for Callum McGregor. Stepping up to the captaincy role after Scott Brown left to join Aberdeen. You've got a senior figure in there from who's played at a very high level, albeit it's difficult to remember someone whose career's taking as dramatic a drop-off than Joe Hart, but nevertheless someone who has been there at a good level that can come in and help with the dressing room and help in that senior leadership role.
Yeah, I think he's
done it again. Riverside's done it again.
I'm still here. I'm still talking, Craig.
You're still talking, right? It was working so fine till we get to this hour mark. Yes. Aye, sorry, Craig. I cut across you with that point. If you want to, like to continue.
Yeah, but I think you're right. He's been a big part of the dressing room. He seems a very popular figure, and I think he's kind of gone down. I think he's actually going to be pretty hard to replace as a goalkeeper. I think Celtic have had their troubles really trying to sign goalkeepers. Their only successful goalkeeper signing policy has been get big guys that were good in England for a while. They did it with it's been like Forster and Hart, and then maybe Craig Gordon for a spell. I've been the only really properly good Celtic goalies in the last while. When they tried to, they tried it last time and they brought Barkas in. That was a massive disaster. So I'll be really interested to see what they do. I think they could do worse than just try to repeat the trick again and just get someone who's like kicking about English. I don't know who they are, but someone who's been kicking about English football and wants to actually play a little bit more, having had some time out, or at least a goalkeeper who is experienced. Thinking of, I don't even know what he is doing anymore, but Adrian, who played with Liverpool for a while. I don't know if he's still at Liverpool, but do you know what I mean? Like that kind of guys.
Willie Caballero.
Yeah, he's had a good goal. He's had a good career. He's played at a high level. He's played big pressure games, but he's not been playing as much as they'd like to recently. And that's the kind of guy they want. Adrian, 37, has still been still at Liverpool, so you never know. But that's the kind of profile. Or they go for like the really exciting youngster, but that is that's laced with potential. So it'll be interesting to see what they go for. I think they'll go for an experienced goalkeeper, and then they've obviously already got Scott Bain as a backup, who's never going to be more than that. So it'll be interesting to see, see where they go with it. But I think they did well out of Heart, and Heart did well out of Celtic, and I think it's probably a nice story in the end, which is not what I was kind of hoping for. I was hoping it would be a disaster.
Is there anything else to be said about the Scottish Cup final, Craig?
Nah, I don't think so. It was just a bit of a damp squib. I actually thought it was going to be a really good game, and it just wasn't, and not one that many will remember for very much. Kind of going forward, unlike the previous one you talked about 2002, but you kind of remember that game because it was like end-to-end stuff, and there's a big. I mean, it was a last-minute winner in that game, but it was 3-2 rather than 1-0, so it felt a little bit more like that. I'm sure the Celtic fans will remember it, but it's not a big game, and let's just hope that it's another 22 years until we have another one of them. To be honest,
yes. Let's go back to the rise of the Diddies. Let's get Hibs and Inverness, Caledonian Thistle, and Hearts all getting a shot again, because that was good fun. But we'll leave it there. I think that's us talked for a fair whack about those two matches. So fair play to you and fair play to me. If you want more content from the Terrace, as always, we tell you this every single week, please subscribe to the Patreon. There are hours and hours and hours and hours of content on there. I think Craig Fowler is in the process of interviewing fans from all across the SPFL about their club season. So there's been some really good stuff in there. A really good one with Kelty Hearts last week, which is worth checking out. So starts as little as £2 a month. So if you like what you hear, please join. Think that I am going to be back on later in the week. Myself, Tony, Sean McGuigan and Craig Fowler are going to be doing our end of season review. That's going to be in person, so that's exciting. There shouldn't be any audio issues there at all. So that's exciting, because I really, really hate the fact that when it all goes quiet and we've got to explain ourselves, because it really, really annoys me. So none of that. But Craig, absolute pleasure to spend time. You hope it's not another 3 years till we join forces again.
Who knows? Maybe we'll be 4 the next time. It's not. I think I'm considered too straight-laced. I think my banter skills are maybe not judged sufficient to be paired up with you all that often. But I think I've held my own reasonably well.
I think you are. I mean, I was actually worried about coming on with you, because I know you're a lot more analytical, a lot more intelligent than I am, and I thought I was going to embarrass myself. So hopefully I haven't done that, and hopefully I've been able to bring some degree of insight and analysis to these 2 games. But if you thought that's the case, stick it in the comment below. If it's on YouTube, stick it in Discord, and I won't read it, because it's not nice to read negative things about yourself. But I think we'll leave it there, Craig. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. See you soon.
And that's us for the season. So there's I can't say enjoy your football or enjoy it respectfully. Just enjoy your break. We'll see you again when the Euros come around. Take care. Goodbye.